computer. Welcome. You're watching a bonus edition of the Charlotte Hobbs Memorial Library Meet the Author series. So far, we've hosted Alex Myers, Barbara Ross, Robert Spencer. Coming up this coming Thursday, November 19th, we have Kate Christensen. In December, we have Dave Patterson, and all of these are main authors. And I'd like to welcome today Roland Creitz. And like Robert Spencer, he is a member of the writing group here at Charlotte Hobbs. The writing group, meets twice each month on the second and fourth Thursday. And to join, just email me, Susan Clout, at the library, sclout@hobbslibrary.com. You can also go to the library website, hobbslibrary.org, and you can find links and all kinds of information about the writing group there and the other Meet the Author videos. So Roland is a former Marine. He's a former primary grade teacher and school consultant. He's lived in 7 states before settling down in Stowe, Maine. His interest in coal mining communities was sparkled by childhood camping in the southern Appalachian Mountains and a map of his father's 1933 journey through the Clear Fork Valley that straddles Tennessee and Kentucky. Welcome, Roland Creitz.
Well, thanks a lot.
Tell us a little bit about your connection to Maine first.
Well, I really don't have much of a connection to Maine. I've lived here for many years, but I'm a New Jersey boy by birth. But eventually following the jobs, I ended up teaching in Senator Conway, New Hampshire, and bought a home right across the state line. So that's how I got to Maine. But I feel like I've been here forever now.
I'm going to just let you talk for a little bit about your book.
Okay. The novel I've written is actually by accident rather than design. When I left teaching, I wrote a nonfiction book on education because that's what I knew most about. And then when I began to search around for a second book to write and get published, I decided to write about my father's journeys during the American Depression. For 6 consecutive years, he and his best friend from college would spend 2 weeks during the summer or early fall, and they would travel all over the country in just 2 weeks. It was amazing how far they went, because in those days you only had 2-lane roads, and some of them were even unpaved and totally unimproved. And then as I started to develop that book, I realized that as a nonfiction book, it wasn't working. I spent about 1.5 years in fruitless writing. And then it was suggested to me that I turn it into a novel, which I immediately poo-pooed since I had never done much fiction at all. But then I decided that if any of my father's trips were going to make it to the light of day for people to read about, it would have to be in a fictional form. So I took a trip down to Appalachia following his map. He and his roommate left no journals, but they did leave maps for each trip. This is a genuine AAA map from 1933. And at the very southern part of their journey, they touched northern Tennessee and then turned around and headed up for the World's Fair in Chicago, with their endpoint being the Mississippi River. Now, for some reason, they decided, when they turned around in Tennessee, they decided to take an unnamed, unimproved road. And I didn't know it, but that road would be the key to this novel. When I traveled that road and went down to the Norris Dam, which is a TVA project in Tennessee, there was a book on the shelves in the visitor center that was written by a woman who actually lived on that unimproved road that I had traveled. And it was a story about a very, very unusual and unique coal mining town. And the more I investigated the town, the more I realized that this was the book I wanted to write. This was the novel. So when I got back from that initial trip, I eventually threw out everything except the information about that tiny coal mining town. I finally called up the woman who had written the book about the town, and she invited me down for a reunion. Each year they would hold a reunion for all the people who used to live in that coal mining town, and I was invited to come down and interview them, which I did. So twice I've been down into that area, and twice I've taken that unnamed or no name road that was unimproved that went right through that coal mining town. And that's where the book came from. It's called To Touch the Earth Again. And it's a story of a very unique town, a very unique, a coal mining town that was different from any other coal town probably in the whole United States of America. Now, you're probably wondering what would make a coal town unique. Well, this town was peaceful. Coal mining towns in those days were very contentious to the point of being violent and even murder. Murder was a part of some of those towns. If you're familiar with Harlan County, Kentucky, you'll understand how violent the towns could be, because the coal mining operators and owners tried to squeeze every possible dollar out of their mines at the expense of the miners' health. But in this particular town, the owner, the operator of the mine, was a former coal miner from England, and he was one of them. So first and foremost in his mind was to take care of his miners and their families, and then profit was a secondary thing. This town was unusual in harmony. Every day, miners were aware, and their families were aware that much danger was waiting for them below the ground. But in terms of their personal relationships, especially with administration, they were in harmony. But of course, in my novel, as in the real thing, trouble was brewing in paradise. And the novel starts off with tension, and the tension builds until, of course, you have a dramatic climax at the end of the book. But that is based on true life also. This town is it's a study in two ironies. The first irony is that if any town deserved to thrive, if any town deserved to live, it was this town. In the book, it's called Possum Run, but its real name was Pruden. Now, Pruden no longer exists. If you drive through there, you'll see a few houses. There are about 60 people scattered all about, but they don't even have a post office anymore. And it's an unincorporated area. All the original buildings are gone now, so you only have a hint of what might have been in the town. The second, the initial irony is that although this town deserved to thrive and to live, it eventually was smacked by fate on a very, very bad day in 1933. The second irony, of course, is that miners expect death and destruction from below, but the fate that ultimately spelled death and destruction for this town came from without, something that was totally unanticipated by the people of the town. Now, there are many exciting characters in the book, and they're based on real life characters, particularly the operator of the town. He was progressive for his time. In fact, he used to commute daily to the coal mining town by biplane. He was a pilot, and he would land in the town, although the town was in the mountains, surrounded by very high peaks. And of course, flying an airplane in that kind of condition was very dicey. There are many strong women in the book, particularly the nurse, a mother of a family of 6, and a school teacher, and of course there's a love affair within the story, but it's basically a story of survival and interrelationships between the people. I guess that's about it in a nutshell. Don't want to give away too much.
Right. Well, I have read the story, and I'm also in the writing group, and I read the story as you were writing it, and a little bit at a time. And I cannot wait to get my hands on the book. Will it be in at local bookstores at all?
Yeah, uh, it's. I'm hoping to get it into the White Birch and the Bridgeton bookstore, which are halfway in between where I live, or I'm halfway in between where they are. At the
Right.
moment, it's in, believe it or not, the 5 and 10 in North Conway, which has a surprisingly large selection of books. Uh, and it'll be eventually on Amazon.com. And of course, through my website, which is rolandcreitz.com.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Um, well, so I didn't know that you had been to the area personally and interviewed people. That is really awesome. Uh, and then you came back and scrapped everything. So how long did it actually take you to write this book?
It took years.
Yeah, how can you?
I used to wonder how uh, books like To Kill a Mockingbird and other books that became famous, how it took the authors years to write them, but now I know.
Yeah, well, why? Why does it take years
Uh,
for our audiences info?
it took a while before I recognized that the coal mining town was the novel. So a lot of my time was wasted writing about the rest of my father's trip. And then, of course, it just takes time to polish it and polish it and polish it, send it out to people to my beta readers to evaluate the book, give me their input, and then to put that into the book. And then it just takes time.
And during this time, did you work also a regular job?
No, I left teaching so I could write. And I've been spending all my time now on writing.
Wow, that's wonderful. A lot of people would love to, they have that dream, you know. So what authors do you like to read? I think our audience might be interested in that.
Well, before he left for the great library in the sky, Tom Clancy was my favorite author. Since then, I've been looking around for other authors, and frankly, I haven't found a one. I'm sort of eclectic by nature.
I wonder if you could tell us a little more about your childhood and your reading and writing experiences growing up. You know, how did you get to this point where you wrote a book and published it?
Well, I started reading novels, adult novels, and by adult I meant novels that were written strictly for adults when I was about 11 or 12. And uh, although I'm an eclectic reader, I enjoy the way novels can take us away to a make-believe situation or make-believe lands. But I didn't really start writing seriously until I became a teacher and I started publishing local articles on education and how to start your kid right in school. And in fact, it was the frustration of education not progressing as quickly as it should have, which led me to eventually write my first book on education. So I really got into fiction by accident because I was, as I indicated earlier, I was planning on writing a nonfiction book about my father's travels, and it didn't work out. But now I'm hooked. I'm hooked by fiction, hooked by novels, and I've got others in the works now.
Well, and that was one of my questions. Are you working on anything else?
Yeah, I'm finishing up an action novel based on an island in Maine, and I've written another manuscript about a woman in 1889 who becomes one of the first engineers in America.
All right, so do you give yourself deadlines? When's that book going to be out?
No. I take my time because I'm always rewriting to make it better, and I don't want to have to press against time.
Well, I'm going to have to get a bunch of elementary school age kids to hear what you just said. I keep rewriting and rewriting and rewriting.
I tell the writing group members that it's fun because when you get done with it, you see the actual bitter product and you realize that you've achieved something.
Yes, yes, yes.
Any chance I can read some of my book to the audience?
Yes, yes. This would be great, great time.
Okay. Uh, the book, the initial paragraph set the stage for the tension that's constant in the old coal mining camps, where everyone knew that there were many ways to die and get injured below ground: flooding, fire, explosion, being suffocated. There were so many ways. So here's how it begins. This is on September of 1933. The iron whistle set above the adit of the North Slope mine was only 8 inches tall, but its high-pitched sound could penetrate every nook and cranny of the coal mining camp. Some of the camp's Irish miners likened the sound to a banshee's wail, since the whistle cried the same blood-curdling warning, "The angel of death is nigh." Born locally, Rachel Logan did not have the superstitions of her Irish mining brethren, but with her husband also working underground, she shared the miners' fears. Thus, as Rachel passed beneath the adit, she murmured a prayer that its whistle remained silent for all eternity. The prayer, however, went far beyond for her husband's concern. The camp's sole doctor was away in Knoxville, and his substitute was hours overdue. Should there be an accident anywhere in camp, she would lead the medical response, and that thought was disquieting. Though Rachel was smart, experienced, and confident, she knew her limits, and she was the only nurse in camp. Rachel had only gone 50 feet more when a miner stumbled out the adit and yanked the whistle's chain. The resulting steam-driven screech made the startled nurse wince. Yet there was no hesitation. She ran toward the medical office, knowing that the miners would expect her to be there, and if necessary, to play God. An important point is that this actual camp was located on a high mountain valley, which was hemmed in by 2 mountain peaks and stretched for about 37 miles. But when you travel that 37 miles of unnamed road, you're like in a different world. So Rachel knows, the nurse knows that she's stuck. If anything happens, she's it for medical care. Can I read one more?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is the doctor. The doctor comes to camp. He's an intern who's totally unqualified to be a doctor because he's just gotten out of medical school. Right? But this is the night before the incident, and he's just been called into the hospital administrator's office by his superior. I'm going where? To do what? Philip Springer's bluntness was born from his fatigue, his raging thirst, and his superior's bizarre pronouncement. If this is a joke, thought the distressed young intern, it's a mighty cruel one. He cut short a yawn and wondered how the hazing of a new employee fit into legendary Southern hospitality. Rufus Shaw, the administrator of the Knoxville General Hospital, had a reputation for being as slippery as the worms he used when fishing. He eyed the doctor warily from behind his massive oaken desk and answered obliquely. A week at Possum Run will go quickly. You'll do just fine, Dr. Springer. It's a tiny coal mining town high in the mountains north of here. Just 1,000 souls or so, I've heard. Everything's set. You take a train out first thing tomorrow morning to Jellicoe, and then a bus will take you from there to Possum Run. The expected commitment, however, did not come. Philip was confused. Jellicoe and Possum Run sounded equally foreign, but he had a much bigger concern. Only a few months ago, he had started his internship, and now he would be a full-fledged doctor, and the only doctor in town? Sir, how can this be? Well, it had been arranged for another doctor from Chattanooga to stand in for Dr. Sanders. But a nasty traffic accident just this morning, well, I was asked to find someone else. And guess what, he thought, Mr. Yankee Doctor? That someone else is you. or I'm not the champion bass catcher in the whole state 5 years running. So Philip knows that he's been hooked. He has no choice but to go, unqualified though he is. And so he enters the coal camp, totally lacking confidence that he can possibly do this job. And so you see the story through his eyes. But it must be emphasized that there are 3 strong women in the story, and you also see the story through their eyes too. One is the nurse whom you've just met. Another is a school teacher. And of course, there's a love affair between him and the new doctor, or her and the new doctor. And then the third woman is the woman of a coal miner who has a family of 6 to take care of.
I was wondering if your book is dedicated to anybody and why.
Well, basically, it's dedicated to the 2 people. Let me read the preface. It says, chance can play a part in writing a novel. In 1993, my late father, Rowland Sr., drove through Appalachia on vacation. His map shows an unnamed, very secondary road that he took as a shortcut. While retracing his trip and planning to write about it, I traveled that shortcut, which led eventually to the Norris Dam Visitor Center in Tennessee. In the Visitor Center, sitting inconspicuously on an inconspicuous shelf, was a nonfiction book, Prudent as We Remember It, by the late Bonnie M. Page. Mrs. Page was a former teacher in and resident of Prudent, Tennessee, a town on the shortcut. Not only was her book the inspiration for The Touch of Earth Again, it provided much of the background material for the story. So the book really is dedicated to those 2 people, my father and Mrs. Page, the school teacher from Prudent, Tennessee.
Yeah, excellent. Are you doing anything else to promote your book?
Yeah, I'm doing various readings in libraries, and I'm doing advertisements in newspapers and things of that nature.
Will you be doing any live things in library, or is it?
Well, the book's only been out a couple of weeks, and I'm just gearing up for the advertising, but things are in the work.
So do you have any of the late night talk show hosts in line?
None yet, but who knows? Maybe someday.
We can watch this late night.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there anything else that you can think of that you'd like to add?
I try to emphasize in the book the differences between today and yesteryear. And for a doctor to operate, even an experienced doctor to operate in those days, was a story in itself, because antibiotics had not been invented. Care was primitive. You didn't have emergency responders at your beck and call. You didn't have helicopters to whisk your injured men and women to first-rate hospital emergency centers. There was none of that. And so if you were a medical person, you were dealing with very few tools to help you in your day-to-day work. The women had childbirth at great risk. There were in the coal towns, you might have midwives and you might have a nurse to help you. And not all coal towns had those amenities, if I can call it amenities. So life was hard, very hard in those days.
My father grew up in the Depression, and so I know, I think your story is inspiring. It's great that you've honored your father by writing this story, and I think many of us could do the same. I know my father has many stories that are so different than the way we live today, so different.
It's interesting, my father never talked about these trips that he took with his best friend. And there, like I said, there were 6 of them, and they went to Mexico twice. They went to the Grand Canyon. They traveled along the deep south and the northern border near in Canada through Niagara Falls. It's amazing how much mileage they would put on in just 2 weeks. And of course, flat tires in those days was a regular occurrence. So you never knew how the car was going to hold up. And yet he never talked about them.
Are you in touch with any family of his friend, your father's friend?
When my father got married, his friend felt like it was betrayal. And he eventually broke off contact with my father, despite my father's best attempt to keep him as part of the family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of sad.
It is very sad.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. And I think this is a great thing to do these little bonus authors. So I will get this video on our website within 24 hours.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to emphasize once more, it's RowlandCreitz.com. And you'll go right to my website, and that'll, if you're interested in the book, it'll take you right to where you need to order it from. Or you can call me up. I live locally in Stowe. Call me up and I deliver.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Goodbye.
So long.